Power interviews on Spectrum Radio 1 FM 90.
A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for making time to join us for this edition of Spectrum Extra. 2 hours of analysis of the top events of the week, and we'll be reviewing those top events of the week. On the lineup, we have the Kenyan protests and the issues involved. We know so far at least 200 people have been injured and more than 100 arrested across Kenya after those nationwide protests kicked off against government's plans to raise $2.7 billion in additional taxes. Police fired tear gas and water cannons to disperse the protesters in the capital, Nairobi. And we are told that these demonstrations did not only take place in Nairobi, they were widespread in about 19 of Kenya's 47 counties. Now, Parliament is due to vote on the bill next Tuesday, and as we came onto air, the protesters are planning to carry out a nationwide strike on that day. The issue is the people are not interested in the taxes that are actually being planned through this bill. That is partly being prompted by pressure from the International Monetary Fund, which says that the Kenyan government needs to increase its revenues to reduce the budget deficit and state borrowing. We'll be looking at that. What does this mean in terms of people-centered approach to taxation and the lessons that can be taken for other countries? We'll be looking at the fight against graft in Uganda. We know there have been MPs arrested, 5 of them so far, and they have already been charged in the anti-corruption court. This week, 2 were arrested, including Igara East MP Michael Mawanda and Elgon County MP Mudimi Wamakuyu. The 2 are accused of stealing 9.3 billion shillings, which is part of the 164 billion shillings disbursed to compensate cooperatives affected by the 1986 Liberation War. The prosecution told court they are ready to proceed with the case on Monday, so there will be no issues of bail. Now, last week, 3 other MPs, Luengo District Woman MP Sisi Namuju, Busiki County MP Paul Akamba, and Bunyole East MP Yusuf Mtembuli were also arrested and charged for apparently trying to push the Uganda Human Rights Commission to part with 20% of its budget. They wanted 11 billion shillings out of the 58 billion shillings of the Uganda Human Rights Commission budget. Now, the Honorable Paul Akamba has again been charged today. Remember, he was rearrested after being granted bail. Today, he again appeared in court, and he's being accused of taking 200 million shillings out of the cooperative compensation money. We'll not be looking at the merits of this case, but we'll be looking at what does this mean on the institution of Parliament, where we continue to see questions being asked about how they are spending money, the character, and the way the MPs are actually conducting themselves. We have a discussion going on online about purchase of generators for private homes of the Speaker and the Deputy, and so many people are asking questions there. Time allowing, we'll also look at the wetland evictions. This is the second week running as NEMA conducts operations to evict encroachers of wetlands in different parts of Kampala and the surroundings. We know what has happened in Ilubiji, and the environmental watchdog has come under spotlight and criticism for the way this exercise has been conducted. The law forbids activities being conducted in wetlands without clearance from that environmental watchdog, NEMA. Now, some people think there is a lot of unfairness, but President Yoweri Museveni and the environmentalists have actually supported this campaign, saying it's timely, looking at the adverse effects of climate change. We'll be looking at that. Is it a good move or a bad move? Do you think there's double standard in the manner in which NEMA is actually conducting these operations? Please do share with us your views on our WhatsApp line, which is 0703 090 090, and help us to shape the discussion here in studio. I have a panel of 4. 2 are already here in studio. Let me introduce Counsel Gawaya Tegule, veteran journalist, lawyer, and columnist with the Daily Monitor. Good evening, sir. Thank you very much for joining us on this edition of Spectrum Extra.
Always happy to be here, Ken, and how's everybody doing?
We are fine, and looking forward to your contribution on these various topics. Mr. George Musisi, lawyer and member of the National Unity Platform Party, pundit on legal and governance issues. Good evening, and thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Good evening to our listeners. Thank you, Kenneth. Pleasure to be here once again, and with my brother Gawaya. He's my former pastor, and he currently is just my colleague
What
and
do you
brother.
mean? What do you mean former? He ceased being a pastor or what?
He's still a pastor,
Or
but
you moved on from his
I
church?
no longer pay tithe, so he unsubscribed me.
So it's all about the money. There should be a reason why you are no longer paying tithe. Yeah? Because I can imagine that time when you were still your pastor, you were not doing so well the way you're doing now.
It's because of me. I discovered better reasons why I'm.
All right. Our two panelists are on the way. When they arrive here, I'll actually introduce them so that they can join the discussion. But let's kick off this discussion, and I think we should begin here home with the issue of MPs being arrested and the fight against graft. President Yoweri Museveni began by telling the country on the day he delivered the State of the Nation address that he was aware of a syndicate and action was going to be taken. He has continued to say that the corrupt will be crushed. Let me begin with you, Mr. Mosisi, on this issue of fighting graft and the manner in which our dear MPs have been actually picked up.
Well, for starters, as a firm believer in the rule of law, I believe that if police and government has a legitimate right to charge anyone whom they believe is reasonably suspected of committing a crime, it's within their right. Secondly, the fight against graft, I'm one of those people who believe that corruption, when it comes to the NRM government, is a mode of governance, is a style of government. So just like President Museveni said at the State of the Nation address, that if you are to arrest everyone, who will you work with? I think he was being honest in that, to that extent, because possibly when he looks all around him, that's why many times he tries to classify amongst corruption. He says, this is a political mistake. For those who have done political mistakes, you can forgive them. So every time they try to put up the fight, many times it's not a new fight as such, but it's part of a longer game plan of who can we throw under the bus for now, or what can we put up a show. And this is not to in any way to state the innocence or guilt of the people so far charged, but we've seen what we are seeing today. We've seen it before. It can only end in two ways. One, they can let the law take its course, where if people are guilty, they can be thrown under the bus, or it can be cosmetic and somehow the cases end up in the.
Throwing them under the bus means being treated unfairly, but sort of.
Well, part of what they call justice is presupposes, and what they call rule of law, treating everyone equally. Even selective enforcement and selective application of the law could be an injustice. Of course, if you are 10 thieves and arrest one, the one cannot say that how comes you've not arrested the other 9 as part of their defense. However, when you talk about fairness, equity, and justice, it presupposes charging each and every person involved. Let me give you an example of the last saga. Ministers appeared in the dock. We had 19 people record statements. Many of them ministers over Mabati. Only 3 appeared in the dock.
Because there was concrete evidence.
Only 2. Well, if you look at the charge, where they charged Honorable Manandutu of dealing in suspected corrupt proceedings, any person who picked Mabati could be charged on that charge. Any person. Because it didn't matter whether you had ill intentions or what. So anyhow, only 3 appeared in the dock. When the political action came, 2 were dropped. 1 is still in the facing charges, but is still in cabinet. So why would Nandutu Ochitu to think that they were dropped because of Mabati? They were not sacrificed. Why would they think that they were charged because? So sometimes there is need to put up a show, and sometimes but of course we've also seen in some occasions, like we did with the pension scandal, that when they feel, because corruption has reached very high levels in this country, that at times you need to put up a show. You need to show people that you're working, like it did with the OPM and the pension scam, where they eventually had to convict some people. So I'm not one of those who is so pleasantly will clap that this is a beginning of a new fight. I know that, and I can insist that the NRM as a government uses corruption as a means of staying in power. So it cannot seriously fight corruption, otherwise it would collapse.
Right, let's hear from Mr. Kawaya Tegule. Your take on this issue. We are looking at MPs, members of parliament, people entrusted to represent the views of their constituency and also work on their behalf. And we are looking at a number of situations here. Some are asking for money from an institution, a government institution, and the others actually allegedly partook of the money that is supposed to compensate some of their constituencies. What's your take about this fight against corruption and Parliament? When you speak to some MPs, they tell you there is some sort of fear hovering around the corridors in the House.
Well, first I want to emphasize, Ken, that all these suspects they're now accused persons because they've been charged. They're innocent until presumed guilty, or until they plead guilty. None of them has pleaded guilty or pled guilty, and therefore, for now, we presume them innocent. And it's important that Ugandans understand that. The issue of crucifying people just because they've been arrested and charged should not be taken beyond the arrest and charging. People must say, let us wait and listen. The Bible tells us that the first witness in court always seems right until his opponent begins to question him. That is when you say, hey, one man, no, I think there are issues here. So for the moment, it can always seem that government is right. But let us wait for the trial. And I also want to invite the judiciary to be impartial in this matter, not to get excited because of the public pressure and the media scrutiny. I would like to see these matters being handled in a very sober manner, so that nobody gets excited about all these people in the dock, and therefore no judge or magistrate should feel under pressure just because these are things. I know the president the other day said he's going to fight corruption. Now these are presidential issues. My fear right now, Ken, is first of all that there is a presidential involvement. I can discuss that for the whole day, by the way. But first, the fact that there is a presidential involvement in courts means that there is a possibility the judiciary is going to be intimidated. And there's a possibility they'll want to do what is politically correct. There's a possibility, and it's real, that the presiding magistrates or judges will be under pressure to find a guilty verdict in these matters. And I would like to advise that the judiciary should stay independent, impartial, and unexcited, completely dispassionate and detached from this matter. They should not descend into the arena. My problem is that every time the president says something, then everybody begins shaking. And for me, that is not a sign of a democracy. It's not a sign of a strong country. It's a sign of a weak state. It means that somebody is calling the shots, and that should not be mentioned whenever the judiciary is doing its work. So I would want, first of all, to sound that I should anything between a warning and an advice or advisory that this thing, let the judiciary be impartial, but also let the public opinion, let the public be calm. These people need to be listened to. My worry is that so far the signs are not good. What we are seeing does not make for a good prognosis. You're seeing people easily excited. You're seeing people grandstanding. Now the president is fighting corruption. Now all this has an impact on the delivery of justice. All this has an impact on the possibility of a fair trial, and we would like to see that sorted out in advance. The other thing is that the president, like Georgia said, is not fighting corruption. No. I was on NBS this morning, TV, and I think I was with Ona Pito and Judge Derek Wandera, and who was the other guy? That's a good question. We're four of us, and I was saying that, you see, it is impossible to cut. It's like cutting you're seated on a tree, up in a tree, and then you're cutting the branch on which you're seated. No government is going to do that. This government is built on corruption. It cannot fight corruption. The tendency we always see is that you can be as corrupt as you like, as long as your relationship with the big man is okay.
Can you substantiate that?
Yeah.
When you claim that this government is built on corruption, you need to substantiate that.
Then you need to give me pen and paper so that I can now put down points for you. Because
Go away. You give him three examples.
You are not allowed to give information.
Let me give you 3 examples. The constitution initially was tampered with, removed term limits when MPs were given 5 million each, not very far away from where you are at Musa Court.
Allegation?
No, it wasn't an allegation. You got people saying Sechikubo was stopped. They told him, Anifaka told him, go and first apologize and come back and pick. And even those who are alleged to have received have never denied that.
It's a long distance.
2017, they were given 10 more million to change.
Long distance moving from Parliament to Mosakot, so people had to be fueled. You know? Huh?
Yeah, but there's nothing to argue about there because people did pick the 5 million in 2005. Same thing with the age limits to have them removed. We know that money was actually how much money was taken at that time?
It was 10, which was supposed to be
10
refunded,
only.
which the opposition people.
No, but there was money given cash down as just just to each MP just to go the ones who are supposed to facilitate this process. So and this is taxpayers' money. Now that's corruption. So the president has built his government on pillars of corruption, on a foundation of corruption. He cannot fight it because if he's fighting corruption, then he's fighting himself, and he's creating an existential threat by himself. So that can forget about fighting corruption. What he's doing is political grandstanding, just to show, playing to the gallery. I think that's the English expression, playing to the gallery to show that we're fighting corruption and whatever. But there's no serious effort. Forget about that. And besides, if you were to fight corruption, then near everybody around him would be in jail by now. So forget about that, Ken. This is not about fighting corruption. This is about political grandstanding.
Our third guest, Mr. Dr. Yusuf Serunkuma, political economist, researcher, and a columnist with the Observer. Good evening, and thank you very much for joining us. You found us already looking at this issue of fighting corruption and the fact that the people who have now been picked under a court process are actually people's representatives.
But this guy, if you need to clarify, is he a snake farmer or a snake charmer? I think that needs to be clear. Have you read that book?
Where he has written a couple of books.
Yes. Now, that particular one about snakes.
It's not about me.
He's a snake himself.
It's not about me.
Let's hear from him.
Anderson, one of the things that bothers me is what has come to be seen as the faces of corruption now. The people who are being hounded as corrupt. Not that they are not corrupt, but they are all over the newspapers and television as the faces of corruption in Uganda. It's very bothersome that some of these are sort of little known to so many Ugandans in the corruption game. The champions, the winners of these corruption contests are nowhere to be seen, and that's quite bothersome.
What do you mean the winners?
Or if it was a contest, we have, the holders of these trophies who have had the biggest share. But the point I want to make is this, Anderson. Every time, as we say in Uganda, if somebody is being tried for a crime in this country, if somebody's criminality is in the news, is a subject of police investigation, we don't ask for the veracity of the case. The question we ask is, who did they offend? On whose toes did they step? That all of a sudden, their crime becomes a subject of investigation. Every politician in this country is a criminal.
Is a potential criminal.
No.
Maybe let's say that.
No.
Which is a fact for all of us.
I know what I'm talking about. Is a criminal waiting to be exposed. They are criminals, but they haven't been exposed. So the moment of their exposure comes when they offend somebody in the high echelons of our political,
hierarchy.
And so the question we should be asking: who have these people offended? Why are their crimes in the public domain now?
Why
have they become?
They have offended the people.
Why
have
they become? Everybody offends us.
Who have the power?
Every politician in this country.
Every
politician in this country has done a criminal activity which offends the public sensibilities. So why have these people become the faces of corruption? Now there are two things I want to say. I don't think they've really offended somebody, but I think they're victims of the moment. You need to realize now that we are talking a moment of great public anger about corruption, sponsored by Spice Ntengo's exhibitions. The country is in the heat of the moment. Corruption is a big conversation. So I think, as Gawea said, the political establishment has to appear to be doing something. And it's not just the public which is anxious about having corruption dealt with, we have sanctions. We have sanctions against some prominent persons in this country. So our government has to appear to be doing something about corruption. And sadly, these are the men who are on the spot at this moment, men and women. And I think it's unfortunate for them. And I don't mean to say they are not corrupt, but they are not the faces we would love to see in the news over corruption.
Can I suggest that Dr. Yusuf gets another cup of coffee? From what,
You are impressed.
Yes, I think he needs another cup of coffee.
We'll do a refill.
Thank you for that. I'll get. And one last point I want to say on because also it's cooperatives, right? We're talking about cooperatives. And this is very passionate to me because cooperatives in this country, the biggest problem they face in this country is not the lack of funding. So to accuse people of having killed cooperatives is partly correct, but not entirely the story. Cooperatives in this country have been denied the space to organize, to mobilize, to organically grow. Among the most thriving cooperatives in this country, well, we have many vulgarized versions of it. Among the most outstanding, which we all know, is the Bugisu Cooperative. And you listen to Nandala, he will tell you how, on end, Mr. Museveni has pushed the natives who are running the Bugisu Cooperative away from the coffee business. So if you're talking cooperatives and you want us to focus on cooperatives, and the language you're giving to us is that there are people who were given money to help in the reconstruction of those that were battered by the 1986 war. You're telling a half story. The story is that after we embraced neoliberalism, they enacted laws which just disable cooperatives organized, because cooperatives don't need money. Cooperatives self-organize. They are organic institutions. The farmers, the fishermen, the marijuana farmers, they organize on their own. They can contribute funding to them. But the environment,
they might be in need of finance to push them into
They turned Museveni into a worker. Museveni was able to hand over this economy to Muzungu. And to do that, he could only get it through violence and through bribes. So he sold or let out other things collapse. Cooperatives that we were talking about here, they were handed over to Muzungu. Muzungu control our coffee, Muzungu control our gold, Muzungu control our telecommunication, Muzungu control our electricity distribution. How are they able to get those things? Through bribing. And they were bribing the man on top. Now the man on top has to distribute the bribes further down. Now those bribes come to Parliament. As Robert Selmaga told us not so long ago, Parliament is the bribe. It's not the money circulating there. So money comes from the top.
You're about to write a book about that.
Let me finish this story. This is a real creation story we need to be. And I'm telling you, what gives me pleasure watching Kenya is that finally you have public discourse pointing the finger at the enemy. That the best way you raise resources is through, sort of working the country, running the country as a business. What we did in this country is that we sold the country. The money that you see are bribes, not really coming from our taxpayers' money. There's a bit of that, but money coming from monopoly. How do you think Umeme is able to pull off such a bill, such an arrangement with government of Uganda that they are using our public infrastructure to overcharge us? We pay the highest tariffs in this region. Among the highest tariffs for electricity.
So what you're suggesting, corruption is structured within the system of government.
First of all, I wanted to paint the picture. Why is Mr. Msisi and Gawaya saying that Museveni is built on corruption? He's built on the corruption, not his own corruption, but because he's a worker in a neoliberal system. Because he's a worker, he has handed over the economy to Muzungu, who all thrive through bribing. Now that money comes down. So this is why people are able to say things like, everybody in Parliament is a thief. How? Because, you see, I'll give you not too long ago, a man, an Indian, stood on the floor of Parliament and said to the media that he wishes Parliament passed.
An Indian MP or?
A businessman. That's
on the floor of Parliament? On the
premises of Parliament,
okay.
On the steps of Parliament. And he said he wishes Parliament passed a bill restricting Ugandans from eating imputa. So that imputa is entirely for export. That a man has the audacity to stand on the premises of Parliament and make such a claim. He has to make such a claim from a strong place.
Actually, to defend that man, you were speaking on behalf of the association that brings together dealers in fisheries, fisheries products.
Because they are
so don't single out.
Because they are foreigners.
No, they are not all foreigners.
Okay.
They are even Ugandans in that association.
There will be Ugandans who are the fronts of the foreign corporation.
And some of those people you're calling Indians actually are Ugandan citizens.
But you see, you need to understand.
So what your grievance is to export import instead of being eaten by Ugandans?
For you to make such a grand claim that bar Ugandans from doing it, it means Parliament has passed many legislation.
Just because there are many of you who don't see the value of exporting it, you'd rather regulate it by law.
Let me finish
because
the
if
point.
you have the likes of you who don't even
Let me finish the point. Let me finish the point.
All right, conclude your point.
Decorum requires that you allow me to finish the point. For you to make such a claim, you have it rests on the bedrock, which is Parliament has been able to pass so many claims, so many legislations that enable us monopoly power. I told you one time here that Museveni wrote a letter which was published in New Vision to Apollo Sibambi in 2002, asking him to review the monopoly contracts they signed with MTN and Celtel. For you to sustain such monopoly in this space, as students of capitalist of markets, so-called free markets, they all reproduce themselves through corruption and violence. So when you see our institution as corrupt as it is, there is an employee, there's an employer on top who is almost invisible. There's a worker.
All right.
A worker who employs the major Chinovese. So our entire structure becomes as corrupt as that because we don't have an economy. We have a colonial outpost.
All right. Let's hear from you, Gawaya Teguli. Now that we understand that corruption is deep, what do we do?
You see, we have essentially two broad types of corruption when we're defining corruption. One is the corruption of need. Somebody has nothing and is trying to meet a need there and then. That is the small corruption. Traffic, the kitu kidogo, traffic police officer and what have you. That's corruption of need because of what they're going through. And that corruption is curable because once the need is met, then there will be no incentive for corruption. I think the bigger corruption which you're talking about is the grand corruption, also called the corruption of greed. It means that, no matter how much they get, it will not reduce their appetite for more. So the more they get, the more they will want. So that is the challenge we're having with the political corruption at the moment, that it is just corruption of greed. You have people who are dishing out. I saw the campaigns of some of members of parliament, including the speaker, and people were showcasing bundles of money. Now, in a poor country, campaigns, and then you have huge amounts of money, bundles, and we ask, where does Anita Among get all this money? Where does Magogo get all that money?
They have been working.
Yes, but you see, in a poor country, the economy creates a ceiling. The economy imposes a ceiling that there is only a certain distance you can go in terms of accumulating wealth. And that once you exceed that ceiling, then you need to explain to the public, how did you get that kind of money in a country as poor as this? And for me, that is where we need to go as a country. I saw the campaigns of Be Serious as a country and say, we want to have people learning how to work hard and sleep with a clear conscience that whatever money I have is I have worked for it. That one is still missing in this country. And the problem is that politics has become very attractive, that once you get to politics, then you can access the national pass easily. You don't have to work hard. All you have to do is be properly connected, and then you'll siphon money from the treasury without anybody calling you to order. Now, what Mr. Museveni and his government have shown this country is that once you're in politics, then you can do what you want with the taxpayers' money. And I want to say that even Museveni and his family, I don't see what business are they in. These people, what business do they do? Can they show us any kind of income that justifies?
Politics.
Yes, because then politics becomes
well, we know very well
business.
Museveni is one of the leading farmers in this country.
Yes,
he
but
rears
for me,
cattle, and from time to time,
I
he tells
agree.
us
I agree.
The meat goes to the UK.
All I want
meat
is
goes
all
to
I want
Sudan,
is
and all
we
this.
need to audit.
Let's go for a break now.
We need to audit the president and his family.
When we
They-
return-
and all these NRM politicians, where do they get all this money?
When we return, we will reflect on the views from the listeners and also wrap up the discussion on this topic and then move on to the Kenyan strikes. Stay tuned to Radio 1 FM 90. We continue after this break.
Spectrum Extra, Fridays 7 to 9 p.m. on Radio 1 FM 90. Spectrum Extra, Fridays 7 to 9 p.m. on Radio 1 FM 90.
Well, thank you so much for staying with us on Spectrum Extra live on Radio 1 FM 90. Review of the major events of the week. And we are looking at the battle against corruption in Uganda. And I promise that before we actually move on to another topic, we'll wind up the discussion about this issue. But we can only begin to do that after hearing from you, the listener. So you've sent in your comments, and we want to thank you for that. So I'll read out some of these comments, and panelists will just reflect on them. We begin with a comment from Ariko. Fighting corruption in Uganda is like mopping an anthill, because how do you do selective victimization, e.g. my poor former workmate Agnes Nandutu, yet there were many people who got the OPM Karamoja sheets, but nothing is being done to them. Then we have another comment from Alex. Gentlemen, it's clear you cannot fight corruption, and especially at Parliament, in the current political dispensation. These gentlemen purchased the right to be in Parliament, and they are highly indebted because of huge amounts used to buy votes, and those are in charge of running the elections. There is a talk that many MPs just paid someone to win the day. So obviously, these expenditures on vote buying should be recouped. Until you get rich, Ugandans going to Parliament to give servant leadership and serve people, and the Agas House is seen as a means to wealth, then you can fight corruption. You need to start afresh. Perhaps get rid of Parliament and other parasitic elements. We can only just watch the circus. That's a comment from Alex. Then we have another comment concerning corruption in this country. I think there is nothing we as a country have not done. Even with more than 10 institutions put there to fight against corruption, the vice is growing at a galloping speed. Police, which is meant to fight corruption, is the leading top most corrupt institution in the country. Honorable Matia Kasaija said that the Mabati found themselves in his compound. Even Honorable Nabanja, the custodian of the iron sheets, was implicated, and the best that was done was to reward such people with more terms in office. We shall keep fighting corruption here in studio, but if the head is not willing to move, then the feet cannot move even an inch. There is no way the head of state is going to convince us that he's fighting corruption, yet he is the one who keeps adding corrupt people more time to steal more of taxpayers' money. That's a comment from Abi Kwizera, who is listening in from Kawempe Kutano. In 1983, Professor Mahmoud Mamdan said, once an organization becomes infected with corruption, it loses the capacity to heal itself of the malaise. NRM, just like other organizations world over, cannot rid itself of corruption. The forces that will rid Uganda will come from outside of the NRM. That's Johnny Nchireka. We have another comment. It is true corruption is a method of governance, but in Uganda it is part of life. It's a byproduct of democracy. That's the price you pay for democracy. In Uganda, the real corruption is in IGG, and maybe keep changing the officers there. Otherwise, IGG will always block all investigation. The president is also a victim of corruption. Then we have another comment. The assumption that the government cannot fight corruption is wrong. There has to be a starting point. If not, declare a certain percentage allowed by law. Corruption can be positive, as has been demonstrated in developed economies like Asia, like those in Asia. Good evening, Spectrum Extra. Why should someone be saying he can't fight it? He must fight it. He cannot fight it, and then who can? Corruption is an individual character. Anyone found guilty will face it. That's what the president said. But remember, we are all human. We can't crucify them. That's a comment coming in from Anthony. I'll begin for the reflection section with you, Honorable William Chinobe.
Yeah, first of all, I agree with the concerns raised by the callers, and of course, my brother Yagawaya Tegule, and submit that cancer is a very, very big problem. By the way, someone was giving a narrative of an elephant, that when you touch the tusk, you give a description which is different from the one who touches maybe the legs and so on. that's why there are so many dimensions.
Mm.
The bottom line is we must agree that we have a big problem. We have a very big problem of corruption in the country.
Mm.
I'm not here to whitewash
Mm.
the NRM that we don't have corrupt people, because we are the ones in charge of this government. The starting point must be the authority. Definitely the president and all of us in political leadership must walk the talk. We must make corruption very, very risky. And that's the reason why, for me, I was even saying that if finally the president is moving with a very strong voice, then that's already a positive stage. And it's a positive development, which we must all support. And I was submitting once again that if you want to fight real corruption, then you don't need just one player. For example, a government in waiting is the government in the opposition.
Mm.
So if you're going to have a fully infested NRM, then you at least you should have a clean and neater opposition, which is the government in waiting. But if the cancer is in the government, is in the opposition, is in the population, is in the
Have you seen it in the opposition?
Oh, yes. He was whitewashing. He is there picking 360 billion from President Museveni, which killed the FDC. What is already killing the NUP is their fight over money. We don't know whether it's corruption or not. But, that aspect. So we are saying we have a very big problem. We need to come out collectively as Ugandans and call it names. By the way, for me, these recent debates which are coming out on the social media, I like them. Because unlike the previous ones, where they were only condemning those who are corrupt in the NRM, if you listen to what the people are saying, they condemn those in the opposition, they condemn everybody, they condemn all the corrupt people, and I think that trend is good. That's why we are saying the population plays a very crucial role by shaming and shunning people who pick money, because these are the pharaohs who take money to them. What would they do? Eat widely and vote wisely. Let somebody come with all his money after the voting day is yours alone. But go and vote the person you think you should vote for, not be the person who has given you the money. But the trend here, now with that sentiment, the corrupt now who are on a rampage to pick money because the elections are around the corner, definitely must do it if they want to come back to politics.
All right.
For the politicians, the bar must be raised because they're the ones who are entrusted with the public resources. Therefore, they should be behaving in a way which is above reproach.
All right.
But the moment you become suspect, then your credibility is undermined. And can only be undermined if the population you serve has also now seen it as a menace. But if you think the problem is only in one side and the other group is not, you are still very far away from the real fight.
Council Msisi,
Yes.
you heard from the listener.
Well, of course, I don't want to fall into the trap of General Chinove, where when he's
Major
trying,
General
Major
retired.
Chinove.
Retired.
Major
But
retired.
not tired.
Well, he can be promoted in retirement like many have been. but I don't want to fall into the trap of what Yusuf called depoliticizing, because at the end of the day, buck stops somewhere. And I'm one of those who strongly believe that the buck stops at the president's table. Even when you are pointing fingers at the opposition, you are saying, the FDC people ate money. He doesn't mention where the money was coming from. He says that, you see how money is destroying NUP. He doesn't mention where the money is coming from. In fact, the very same people, they want to eat their cake and have it. When NUP took a stand and said that we are suspending our vice president because of these things we don't find right, the same people said, no, why are you fighting? How can you fight corruption like that? So either way, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. So for me, I don't want to look at it in the sense of saying that, yes, every society has corrupt people, without doubt. What the key distinction is that in Uganda, corruption seems to be a way of life, and it seems to be, even that is why many times when people are charged, like it was with Mabati, very few people believe that it was because of corruption. Very few people believe that these people are being charged because they are guilty, because even the people who used Mabati were so many. And then you have all these stories swallowing around the highest echelons of sometimes even hovering over parliament. This year alone, we've had so many things hovering over parliament. We have so many things hovering over State House, Ministry of Defense, and so on and so forth, that it seems to be in the highest echelons of power. And when you tend to go for those who have stolen catfish, when people are running away with sharks, no one will believe that that fight is legitimate.
Right. Dr. Yusuf, your reflection on the comments coming in from the listener.
Two things struck me. I listened to the call and listened to Major Chinove. And he said something about people in the countryside having motorcycles, having built small houses, iron roofed their houses, and this 90%, 90%, and my heart sank because our dreams have been reduced to very small things. Our dreams as a country, we have been reduced to these simple pleasures that come to us, some material benefits such as driving a motorcycle or roofing your house with iron sheets. And this explains that, when you go high up, a speaker is happy to drive 2 Mercedes-Benzes to Parliament.
Well, we can't have the same aspirations.
Look, the dreams...
To some people, riding a motorcycle is a huge achievement.
But no, for then, a serious member of the government to appraise of it is troubling. Because our dreams, we celebrate small things. There's a level where we need to reach and say, people can actually afford these things, but we need to raise the bar.
So what should we be celebrating?
But I just want to smuggle that point in, because I need to develop a small point before we close this conversation. We talk about cultures of corruption, when corruption becomes culture. That the government in office sets precedent for culture. When John Pombe Magufuli became president of Tanzania, for the 5 years he was president, of his legacies, prominent among them is the fight against corruption. That he kept everybody in check. When Raila Odinga was celebrating the life of John Pombe Magufuli, the key thing he mentioned was the fight against corruption, set in motion by the man on top. When Mother Bird is eating, the young ones watch its mouth. The Igbo have said. That corruption cultures, one sets the ball rolling. And I've said, what we're missing in this conversation, Anderson, is at what point do we call corruption culture? At what point did everybody become corrupt? The opposition, members of the general public, at what point did it become? And that's what I tried to do. That's what I tried to do at the beginning. That you need to have the corruption tree, that the neoliberal era we live in has given us a system of workers who only thrive on sharing bribes, and bribes have come all the way down to the lowest person.
All right, we'll move on now to our next topic, and I'll bring in Mr. Gawaya Tegule. Let's look at this Kenyan protests. Kenyans, many young people actually standing out. They have now called for countrywide strike demonstrations, which will take place on Tuesday, the day the House actually discusses this issue of increasing taxes. And now, listener, if you're just joining us, the Kenyan government plans to raise $2.7 billion. That's in additional taxes. And in order to do that, there's a finance bill, which has been tabled in the House and which is being discussed, which introduces a number of taxes. Earlier this week, the government softened its position on a number of issues in that bill, but the protesters are insisting that the entire bill must be withdrawn because they believe it's unbearable to pay the taxes they are paying. And one of the things that actually they're talking about is corruption that is also happening in Kenya. Let's hear from you, Gawaya.
I think a lot can be said about that, but let me just restrict myself to a few. One, it's important that government listens to the people. I think a government has a duty to listen to the people so that whatever people are saying is taken care of. It doesn't mean that that government should do what people are saying. It just means that government, first of all, must listen, must provide an ear to say, okay, fine. People are speaking, what are they saying? What are their concerns? How can we take care of those concerns? I think that's very, very important. At the same time, the people themselves must know what they want. What is their problem as Kenyans or as Kenyan young people? Is it that they don't want additional taxes? Is it that they don't see how the taxes are going to benefit the nation? Is it that there's a gap between, they don't see how the taxes are helping the people, that the relationship between increased taxation and increased level of services does not exist, I think those are questions that must be answered. But I also want to ask the Kenyan young people, what are they looking for? Are they looking for a better tax regime, or are they looking for a change of government? I think that is very critical. I have seen a few videos, and some of them are saying this is a revolution, Ruto must go. I don't know. I want to suggest this with respect because Kenya, as well, every country has its politics and its unique dynamics. But if what they're looking for is a fair tax regime, I think that is okay. Government must listen. And but again, at the same time, the protests must be demonstrations, peaceful demonstrations, peaceful and unarmed demonstrators on the show, on the record. That's critical. If you come to a demonstration and you come armed with stones and sticks, I think there's a problem there. That one does not enjoy the protection of the Constitution. If you come to a demonstration and you want to hurt police officers, I think that's a problem there. So they have a duty to keep these protests within the parameters of legislation and constitutional protection. Lastly, if what they want is regime change, then I think they need to think again about the methods being employed to cause regime change. It's very important that Africans get used to the idea of the ballot box doing the talking. If I were a citizen and there has been we have shown that along the line there can be peaceful transfer of power, and after that is after free and fair elections, then I would want to put this on my to-do list on the next election, so that I'm able to vote out a government because they have not lived to my expectations. But if I set a new precedent, and I'm saying through what they're calling a revolution, government is changed, then you are setting a blueprint for instability in an otherwise stable country. And that is something that they must consider seriously. You can get out of excitement, say Ruto must go, and you can succeed in bringing Ruto down. But you'll have set precedent that nobody who comes in through the ballot is safe, and therefore you are giving way to violent regime change, and that will not be very good for anybody.
All right, Dr. Yusuf, your take on the Kenyan situation.
There are two things that are very exciting for me on this: the rejection of the finance bill. It went through, but there are two things are very exciting for me about the protests. The first one is the demographic composition of the people who are taken to the streets. I think we didn't see the same demographic composition during the Arab Spring. It was a mixture. A great deal of these were, between their 20s and their 30s. But now we're seeing a different generation which is also waking up and saying we need to take the matters of running this country into our hands. The ways in which this country is run matters to us. I find that really exciting that they're using a platform which they normally use for supposedly banal things to talk serious politics. I found that really exciting that now the media is being used in a way that speaks to the language of running the country, and I find that really wonderful. The second thing that I found really exciting, I think this is very important for me, because right after the Kenyan election, I published a piece in the Pan-African Review, and it was published again in the Review of African Political Economy, and I argued that the smoothness of an election, and I think many people, lovers of democracy, may not like to hear this, the more an election is smooth on the African continent, is the final, it finishes, it eases the way the country is going to be exploited. Not exploited by the people in it, but exploited by the people on top of it. And what I found striking is the language being spoken by the young people on TikTok, that finally the enemy is being identified, the IMF. That, Larry Madowo did a story on CNN where he said the young people, the supposedly riffraffs and young people are saying, IMF is my problem, not William Ruto. IMF is my problem. IMF designs the tax regimes. IMF designs our budgets, interest rates, who goes where. Because we've been pushed into so much debt, now they're harassing, governments so that they can give them more debt to increase taxes. What taxes do by default is that they push local initiatives out of the market space, creating space
for you to go and borrow.
No, for their own business to come into these spaces. And Kenya is a very prime space because of its strategic location. So they are pushing the ordinary person, they're taxing them so much, and at the end of the day, normal business persons will be knocked out of the market, and then cheaper goods coming from Europe, sometimes without taxation. As maybe, I don't know if I've said this on the show, the amount of subsidies that European companies get when they operate in Europe is mind-boggling. Can you imagine a cow in Europe, every dairy farmer gets 500 euros every year for a single cow. And then they bring their milk to sell it on the African continent very cheaply because it was subsidized by the government. Now, the inverse of it is that they ask our governments to impose stronger taxes. Now, the Kenyan people are saying, IMF, we see you. You are the one running the show. Ruto is a colonial caretaker. We see him, his background noise. Now we are targeting IMF. And I was so impressed in young people.
I was going to ask you why you think Ruto does not know that IMF is the problem.
Because you see, we have weak leaderships across the African continent. They're often squeezed to the wall. You see, Museveni can talk big, but he's a coward. William Ruto talks big, but he's a coward. You see, you remember, the embarrassment when...
Coward in which sense?
They don't have the mettle to stand colonial pressure. They quickly give in. I'm thinking we are run by colonial caretakers, cowards. You see, Ruto. Let me finish this point. Ruto, as soon as he came into office, he said, why are they been calling us? This country is calling us for these stupid summits across Europe and Russia. I'm not attending of this. Why don't we just send our commissioners to attend those meetings? He has attended all of them. We are run by colonial caretakers who have the mettle to stand. You see, look at our banking regimes. I told you here before that banks on the African continent, especially in Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, are the most profitable across the world, despite being the least effective. Why do you think is that? Because of interest rate.
All right.
So, but guys, let me finish one point. I hope I haven't taken so much time. Let me just finish. I'm so passionate about it. That the enemy is being designed. I was on this show, Anderson. I was discussing taxes. Who designs our tax policies in this country? Who gives us the language? Levy this, levy that. When we're discussing, who? It is fellows who are foreigners. I was asking, can we have our economists, our wonderful patriots who are saying we're now taxing this, taxing that, to come and have a debate with us? Because you see, I don't know you, you know them. Who are our economists? Who are our good finance experts? Who are saying, URA, pick this tax now, pick this. Who are they? Because the IMF designed this policy, and the men and women leading us just give these things voice.
All right.
Kenya has given us a wonderful example.
All right, let's hear from James Kinobe. Honorable, your take on this Kenyan situation.
First of all, it's ugly. It's ugly.
Ugly in which
I
sense?
want to pick it from where I say is that the agenda is not fully defined.
Okay.
As the demonstrations proceed, you hear regime change, you hear tax bill, but I know there must be an invisible hand. Knowing Kenyan politics, there is an invisible hand, because until recently, when there were negotiations about the AU chair, similar demonstrations were in the capital, being spearheaded by one of the leading opposition leaders. Now, if those of you, especially these friends who are academicians, you study the politics and the trends in politics. For them, unlike us, it's power blocks. You have this block, you have this block, you have the other blocks, and so on. So I'm not surprised that the agenda is being set away from the young people. Just imagine, how can a street demonstrator know the details about IMF other than being spoon-fed about the details we're talking about? No to that.
These young people are tech savvy. They have mobile phones. They are researching. They are following closely what is being debated in Parliament.
And that's the problem with the TikTok.
And the IMF has been speaking.
Let me tell you. Do you follow TikTok?
I am on TikTok.
TikTok clips have very simplistic way of analyzing situations and even giving conclusions. I'm not surprised that they may have got some such conclusion, but I'm saying it's ugly because you cannot discuss anything logical in a mass demonstration. if they had grievances, these grievances should have gone to their leaders. But now, I think the leaders are even
Their
now,
leaders are
the
still
leaders
not
in
to be
parliament
listening.
are now thorough. No, you see, talking about something and actually doing it is the difference. Let me tell you, you know, when we came in as communists, we were anti-capitalism and all of that. When the actual working came handy, we had to abandon some of those because of the...
You cowardized.
No, not cowardized. We were talking about a global village.
You
where
shed
you can
off-
no longer...
You shed off your
operate
skin.
You
alone.
handed over our economy.
I'll give you one example. We were pushing negotiations with the goods, and I think it was maize in Zimbabwe or somewhere. As we were preparing our maize to send to Zimbabwe, the international community offloaded free maize to the people who were supposed to sell maize to, because we were talking about barter trade. You remember how the collapse of Yugoslavia and those other countries here even collapsed the ideas we had of barter trade and so on. So when we are talking about politics in the international arena, we need also to understand how the non-state actors influence all the policies that and you cannot wish them away, whether today Dr. Salum Kumeyo, the president of Uganda, or any other person. So I would expect that this is not a debate you can bring out here. For me, the method of using the masses to cause a revolution, because what started like a bill is now climaxing into something else. Ruto must go. Now, the moment you set a precedent that way, it is infectious. You remember what happened in Arab Springs when it started? It almost spread everywhere. As I speak today, do you know what is in Khartoum? Khartoum, the people started like that, throw away Bashir, they went to the streets, and finally now in Khartoum there is no government.
Major, you know you're sounding like a TikToker.
No, but I've been your ambassador in Sudan, and I know what,
oversimplifying now.
not oversimplified. I'm telling you the method is very, very important. Gawaya has mentioned it, because we are looking at methods that will solve our problems. If you are going to have an elected government thrown out in an election which you all glorified as being peaceful and whatever, then you are setting a very wrong pace.
Now, Major
No,
Chinobe,
that's
we
part
have a
of
situation
the
here where the
Constitution.
government wants to levy taxes.
No,
The people who are supposed to pay are saying no.
Let's go now to Kenya. Definitely, Kenya has got a different setup from Uganda. Kenya is a employer basis more than this country. So the country must be very sensitive when you are levying taxes and the impact they are going to have on your population. Unlike my country here, where I think over 70% of the people here may not even understand what you're talking about, the taxes. In Kenya, the impact directly flows to the population because they eat from the market. Thirdly, the situations in Kenya. Kenya is a very structured power broker system, unlike ours here. And I don't believe that this is going to, you just wait. The few people are going to be called and you have a handshake, and some of these demonstrations are going to be called off the street. But the challenge is once you excite some of these young people and you eat up, like now the negotiation, with due respect.
What do you mean eating alone, Major?
We all know what is happening now after the demonstrations which had recently, after a negotiation of someone to be offloaded somewhere else, suddenly the situation came up down. So it's very unfortunate that leaders use the young, innocent to fight for fairly personal benefits.
All right.
Now, on the tax base, I think the challenge for us,
Major
which we
Chino
also
has
have here,
forgotten that the Duelo had Kadogos.
the challenge we have,
And it could have been one of them.
the challenge you have, but you see, the challenge you have is that when I say you're a thief, I said, but you're also a thief. So I shouldn't. But the soul who became the
It's
major
very
preacher of
bad to
Jesus
be
is
called ugly by frog.
All right, let's allow him to
No,
land.
the point I was now making about the taxes, the challenge also is our tax authorities. What normally IMF, they set targets. Normally in taxes, they talk about the percentage of your GDP and related to taxes. For them, what they do here, instead of widening the tax base to reach out to many other people, you offload all that to the few people who have already been captured in your net. And once those ones get overwhelmed, definitely some of them finance these people to do what they do.
All right.
So I think what we need, I don't know what they should be doing, because definitely tax has never been a popular thing. Even during Jesus' time, the issue of taxes was very controversial. But it is a necessary evil.
All right.
We only
Spectrum
need to
Extra
equip people and
on
they
Radio
link
1
the
FM 90.
services
Let's
to
go
the
for this
taxes
break. When
and-
we return, we will hear from Gawaya Tegule on the Kenyan situation, but also we have another issue to deal with, the issue of evictions by NEMA in the wetlands. Stay tuned, Radio 1 FM 90. Spectrum Extra continues after these messages.
Spectrum Extra, Fridays 7 to 9 p.m. on Radio 1 FM 90.
Well, thank you so much for staying with us on Spectrum Extra live on Radio 1 FM 90 review of the major events of the week. My guest, retired Major James William Chinobe, former Uganda ambassador to Khartoum. He was an MP for Katikam North between 1996 and 2006, and also served as a Minister of State for Youth and Children Affairs. Mr. Dr. Yusuf Serunkuma, political economist, researcher, and columnist with The Observer. Kasokawaya Tegule, veteran journalist, lawyer, and columnist with the Daily Monitor. And now coming on the mic to share his view on the Kenyan protest is Councillor George Musisi, who is from the National Unity Platform Party. Yes, George.
But you didn't mention where Yusuf and Major Chinobe, which parties they come from. How come?
Yusuf is a scholar. Yusuf is a scholar, and for Major Chinobe, when it walks like a duck, then most likely it is a duck.
Right. Actually, for me, I would like to look at the positives out of the protests. Well, first of all, I believe non-violent demonstrations are part of a democratic society. And I don't want to imagine that every time this narrative, that every time someone is demonstrating is being used. You know, they have created that narrative in Uganda. When people demonstrate, even online demonstrators like Spire, the narrative is that they are being used by imperialists. You've heard that someone has to be used to say something. I think that we don't have to be caged into that. And then the demonstrations by the youthful people, I think also debunks this theory in Uganda. And Dr. Yusuf, I've had him propagating it so much that always blaming the opposition, the leading opposition. I don't want to imagine that it should be the duty of the opposition to oppose bad things always. You realize that
the government in check.
Yes, and I don't think it's the duty.
The government in
no,
check.
No, I don't think it's a divine or constitutional obligation of any person. Any person who feels oppressed.
Can I give you information? One time I was on a program with colleagues like we've been in the small recess. Then I said, but honestly, I must say, don't you see anything good out of that? I said, no, my duty is point out whatever you failed. You've mentioned what you've done. For me, I was, even if you do 10 and fail 1, so the opposition here is doing the contrary.
So I want to keep to make a distinction between the Kenyan opposition and Ugandan opposition. But one, opposition would do a very good job of keeping government in check in a place where other supportive mechanisms like the media, the judiciary, the civil society, the academia are fully independent. What is happening in Uganda today? You have a professor, the vice chancellor of Makerere, who even wants to dictate law exams, how they should be set. You have a media which is totally muzzled. You have an independent judiciary which is fighting for independence amidst a very harsh. You have a civic society which is almost dead. Professional bodies are almost dead. So, and then every burden of keeping the government in check is on the opposition, and they're always saying, what are you doing? Meanwhile, they're always running after jailed supporters. So for me, I think that by students or youthful people coming up without any even political or at least known grouping, for me, I don't want to imagine that they're being used or they have to necessarily have an agenda. If I can draw parallels with the Ugandan youthful people, is that many of them, especially those in urban centers, and I'm one of those who believe that the November 2020 riots in Uganda were spontaneous. Many young people are pushed, actually, may not even be necessarily regime change, but the daily issues of living. I don't have rent. I don't have where to. I don't have what to eat today. I'm pushed by that, whether it's brought by Ruto or otherwise, because some of those people, I'm sure, supported Ruto not more than 3 years ago. So where people are facing existential issues, and in most of our young people in urban areas are facing existential issues. It's about daily survival. So they don't care what happens in the bigger run. So I don't want to put it in the debate of that, whether they are being used or an agenda. And for me, I think that if the demonstrations are non-violent, we don't have to follow necessarily the boxes that you want, that you talk to your leaders. Civic non-violent demonstrations is a sign of a democratic society. And I think that in that way, Kenya stands way above shoulders than many other peers in the region.
All right, very quickly, we need to move on.
My argument is more nuanced. Every civic uprising often has its icons. If you fold closely, even the protests in Nairobi now have their icons, the symbols around which people mobilize. So Bobi Wine at some point used to be the symbol, the icon of a people power-led movement. Presently is Spire Sentango, Agatha Taire, Agora people, Godwin Toko. So every revolution has its icons. At that moment when they become a structured opposition, the critique has to come because they've made it easier for the government to rein in on them. The more organized under an autocracy you are, the easier it is to deal with you.
All right. Now, gentlemen, let's move on. One of the things we need to look at now is the issue of the wetland evictions. I know we have limited time, but it's very important for us to share our views on this particular issue. We all know NEMA is conducting evictions. There's an uproar in some places. President Yoweri Museveni has defended them, but we have also heard from environmentalists who also say what they're doing is just right, because we have a problem of climate change. If we don't act now, our future is bleak, given the fact that our economy is largely driven by agriculture, which is rain-fed. And I'll begin with you, Honorable Chinobe. Your take on these evictions, what would you say?
I don't know what to say about the evictions, because I don't think they are even right to evict people now. I think we have a policy on wetlands. The policy should be amplified very, very, very properly. People need to appreciate what a wetland is. If I'm growing my pumpkins in some place which you call a wetland, and you tell me to stop, and then the following day you bring a police post and set it up where you evicted me, I think we have not sent consistent message on this fight against wetlands. I think this needs a slightly more time, because there are even problems, or legal problems. Council will tell us that some of the land, let alone Rubiji, which is a public land, but there are even areas where land is legally owned, people have land titles. In NEMA, instead of educating them on how to use the land, we talk about conservation. How do you conserve nature and you coexist with it? The approach NEMA takes sometimes falls short of the experience. I haven't read their act to see whether the functions are not properly brought out, and maybe that's why they are failing.
Well, one of the provisions is actually, before you do anything on the land, whether it is yours or not, you must get clearance from NEMA.
I know people who have approached NEMA. They are not guided on how to use the land. They are given certificates to go ahead and settle in wetlands. And that's where the problem
Really,
lies.
to settle?
Yes. And even tell those who were evicted that you did not come to consult us, not that they did the wrong thing. But those who are not evicted came and we gave them certificates. Then what type of education you give those who have certificates, which you can't give me to coexist alongside the other people I am with here? So I think that's a very, very completely muzzled out and really mishandled activity, which shouldn't have started with demolition, because the questions which were coming from Parliament were that these structures have been there. They have legal documents from town councils of buildings, approved buildings. Why do you have to wait for people to inhabit these houses before you stop them? And the areas we're talking about just next to us, in very few distances from where the headquarters of NEMA is. I think we, as government must go down on the board to see how we handle this, and before we actually victimize more people. It's going to bring out unnecessary public outcry, and that will cost us, even as a country, stability, which you so much deserve, the production of foodstuffs, which we are talking about, and even the harmony. You have seen people now blaming the poor king of Buganda as if he's the one who has failed to rescue them. But we are telling them, no, there's a policy. What is the relationship between me, the utilizer of that land, vis-a-vis the established
landowner,
acts
landlord
that you have, not only landlords, but the acts that govern how I use my land. I think as government, it's our duty to come out and educate the people, because I'm told it's not only a wetland. By the way, even if it's a hill and you are leveling it, I'm told you're supposed to still to get a certificate of how you go about it. How many people know about this? And before we victimize them, I think we need to do slightly more work to educate the people, to understand why you should have a road crossing the swamp, and me, I can't have a small garden there.
All right. George, your view on this?
Of course, I've argued earlier this evening that selective enforcement of the law, whereas it doesn't mean that I'm innocent myself, is not justice. actually it undermines the rule of law, because rule of law is based on the principle that every person the law should apply selectively.
The law should be blind.
The law should be blind, it
Yes.
shouldn't see. So the only issues there for me is one, if this is a wetland, was there sufficient notice for people to evict? Because in any case, government has a duty to plan as well for its people. But then secondly, if the law is seen to be selective in terms of implementation, if you have, where NEMA argues, to be the devil's advocate, that, well, not every usage in the wetland is forbidden. There's some usage which is licensed. So maybe it needs to emphasize its awareness.
And the considerations towards that.
And consideration towards the licensing, and make it fair to all. Because if you have one with a concrete building next to a makeshift which you are breaking, and you're leaving a concrete building in the wetland, it will create all sorts of sentiments that you're being
Well, I've
selective.
not seen concrete buildings
We've
being
seen-
left. I've seen them being knocked down.
Well, Starbucks is not a makeshift. That which is
Which
not so far away
Starbucks?
from headquarters, which is not so far away from where they broke down a number of things. But then secondly, there are so many wetlands which we see which are being filled every day. So NEMA needs maybe to come and clarify that, no, actually this one has a license, we allow them to fill, and why you cannot allow other people to fill. So I think it needs not be felt only in terms when it's breaking down these people, but when it's also emphasizing its message and awareness. But most importantly, to enforce the law. One of the reasons why Jennifer Musisi was very much cherished when the first 3 years of her office was because she was enforcing the law across the board. She broke down a number of big malls, broke down a supermarket, and people go to feel that, and that's one of the reasons why she's still being felt, because she did just one simple thing: enforce the law without looking at who's the owner. And that is what we need in Uganda. It would be easier for those people to entertain their tears if they knew that there's another rich man who had breached the same and had suffered the same fate.
All right, let's hear from you, Dr. Yusuf.
There are so many obvious contradictions with the way NEMA is going about it. And I'm just wondering what the game plan is. Because, we see these contradictions. I don't think NEMA is blind. They see these contradictions. Sudid was land filling Lake Victoria. As you go to Bunga, someone was land filling a wetland. There's a mall.
They issued a statement that they're moving there next.
There is a mall,
Bunga area.
but there's a mall here as you go to Mpererwe, Akamwesi, which is seated properly on a wetland. So these obvious contradictions, I'm sure NEMA knows them. The question for me is whether NEMA is in charge. And what's this gamble with going for these
I know where Chris now is going.
riches of the earth? It's really puzzling for me whether Kankwasa is really in charge. And it seems to me that we would be wasting precious time on a very powerless institution which is under capture itself.
But we have a problem if wetlands actually being encroached on. It becomes a problem when you consider climate change and the role wetlands actually play. So how do we strike the balance?
Because you're talking about the collapse of state institutions to enforce the law, to do the thing they're supposed to do.
Not
Well,
only that,
Major General here,
these Ugandans who actually construct in wetlands. Someone was actually telling me it's even more expensive to construct in those areas because you have to fill with the soil, gravel, and all these kind of things. Why shouldn't we also look at them as an issue?
I think as Major General said at the very beginning, we need to sort of create, first of plot creation stories of how we ended up, all of us, running to be congested in a small place. You need to talk about our public infrastructure. How much access do we have to the city in the morning? Public service road, because everybody wants to be cramped up in this small place. Because places farther
But
away.
I can give you
present-
information on that very question. For example, you see the Entebbe Road, where it crosses Masaka Road in the swamp. Instead of sitting on the ground with the field swamp, they have pillars. NEMA can come and say, if you want to construct in this place where you have running water, put your house on pillars so that you coexist and stay up there while the water
Major
continues
General,
to flow.
you're talking about a super functional NEMA, which, when there's public anxiety over Sudiri Pareria filling Lake Victoria, which is a major, environmental ecosystem, that the public needs accurate information. Because the problem is not land filling Lake Victoria, by the way. If you go to the Netherlands, for example, the Amsterdam is seated on on an ocean, right? So there are channels which water still crisscrosses the city. So that's not a problem, but the public needs to be educated on what is the man doing. Because you see, as you land
And then
filling this
guide
side,
the person
the
and-
water has been pushed over the other side. There was a flower company, I think it was in Entebbe, which was Rosebuds, which
Yes.
was, draining
Sewage into the
into the lake. And so we are talking about a functional institution, which I think, as I said before, we might be spending precious time in a very powerless institution.
All right. Let's hear from Mr. Gawaya Tegule on this issue of the evictions.
Ken, I think we need to think deeply as a country. No, sorry. As a nation, we need to begin thinking.
A nation.
Yes, we need to begin thinking. Part of our problem is that we don't think. Yes. We are basically a nation of idiots who do not take time to think. Because most of the issues you're seeing around, all you need to do is take time to think. Now, we never do that. We have failed to build institutions. The institutions we have built, the institutions that these Kinobes and the Musevenis have built are for the purpose of providing jobs to their kith and kin. And that is why it is predictable. Every institution you see, it is headed by predictable people. You know who's going to work there. And you know why they're there, basically to earn a living, not to develop this country. So we might have a state, but it is a weak state. We might have systems and structures, but they're completely ignored and basically locked out of the activity equation. They're never a factor in the equation. So as a country, as a nation, we need to sit down and just begin to think about tomorrow, think about how we can make a nation out of what we have, how we can build a state that's going to be stable and strong and able to perform. We have no functionality as a state, so that is why we're having all these problems. NEMA is not there for you and I to have a secure and safe environment. It is there to provide jobs for a select few. It's there to be a conduit of money for a small predatory elite. And that is all you're going to see. So let's not even debate about the NEMAs and what have you, because they're not there to perform. They're just there for sure. And to understand about we have institutions and we are working and that kind of thing. That's the unfortunate thing about this country. So we need to begin thinking. And once we begin the thought process, then a lot of the things shall be sorted out. I also want to suggest that the selective application of the law must be condemned. We see politicians building in wetlands. We see foreigners building in wetlands. Why are they not being evicted? And why can't they be touched by the law? That is only because somebody is involved. I see anything that has Salim Saleh in it will never be touched because, hey, that's whatever. So we have individuals like Salim Saleh, like Yoweri Museveni, who are bigger than than the institutions that are in this country. We have industrial parks. I see in Bali, an industrial park built in a wetland. A wetland. That's a shame. And then, but because it has the Chinese in it, it has apparently Salim Saleh's blessing, then you cannot touch it. So NEMA is basically, what do they call it? A white elephant, just there for show, but nothing really practical. And lastly, I would want to call for decentralization of the economy. That's one issue that we are not good at thinking. We need to take the economy out of Kampala, to take the economy beyond Kampala. There's a lot of land in Nakasongola, in Luweero, and all these places. We need to plan our development.
That's what you think. Most of the land in that area has actually been bought off.
No, that's okay. But
By you people in
It
Kampala.
has more wetlands than even in Kampala.
Yes, but what I'm saying is we need to begin planning. Once you plan your development, then all these things can be taken care of. But this comes when a nation begins to think. You can have very good development taken outside Kampala, and you'll see a very beautiful country coming forth. As long as you are thinking, then everything will be fine.
All right, we have more comments coming in from the listeners.
But as you get the comments,
very
for me,
quickly.
I still think we also need to study, to take time. Because, to be honest, I haven't taken time to study the law. The challenge you will normally have here, you have very good laws that are not properly implemented. You may find that the NEMA statute has got all those things we're talking about, and possibly they are not fully implemented the way they should be implemented sequentially. They start from the extreme end of demolitions, yet they would have started maybe somewhere else. So I want to give a disclaimer. I don't think Parliament would have enacted that law without those safeguards. Only that we need to see. Maybe you invite us another time and we go through the law and we see where the gaps. And then maybe it's fair we get somebody from the NEMA authority to help us to respond some of the areas.
No, don't bother about that one. I can tell you, I had an environmental law. I can tell you with authority that the NEMA Act, as it is very, very good. It's very, very good. It's very comprehensive. The constitutional provisions that govern environment are very, very comprehensive. So this is we have very good law. The policy is okay. Our problem is that as a state, functionality has failed. So we have individuals that are bigger than the state and the institutions that are set up under the state. That's the only problem. That's what NEMA is facing. If you look at the law, you will not fault anybody. I mean, because everything. I mean, you won't fault the law because it is perfect. I can guarantee you on that it is perfect. The issue is certain individuals are beyond the state and the law and the institutions set up there under, and then these institutions that you're calling to order do not exist to perform. They exist as a place of employment for your friends and family as NRM. And until you sort that one out, Major Chinobe, I regret to say that we shall still be having this same discussion 20 years from now, inshallah.
All right, gentlemen, we are coming towards the end of this show, so let's wrap up this discussion. We began by looking at the fight against corruption in Uganda. We went to Kenya, and now we've dealt with the issue of NEMA. Overall, the picture.
You've not read the comments.
I've not read the comments. I have a couple of comments here that I actually want to read out. We have a comment here. Good evening, Kenneth. Lubiji isn't affected as Luzira, Chirombe, and Inamuongo. No evictions are happening. The reason that section of Kampala is being evicted is because it's a huge supporting catchment of a certain political party. Its proximity to town and in terms of demos. Well, that's a comment from Richard. We have another comment: selective application of the law by NEMA. There is evidence of a video clip showing dumping of soil in a big chunk of Lake Victoria area just behind Imperial Hotel, but NEMA is not bothered. Instead, they go to attack the poor and the homeless. That's a comment there from that gentleman there. And then we have a comment from Elder Eresu John, Kabaramaido County, once Kabaramaido County MP. He said Kenya is significantly different from Uganda politically because the politicians in Kenya rely entirely on the ballot box to access or retain power, and the history of the country has been without military assistance to take and keep hold of power. This is not with Uganda. Therefore, whereas demonstrations can take place as a civilian form of expression of disinterested people against government policies and expect no further issues that might threaten the state, in Uganda, there is constant fear of any demonstration because the state fears escalation because power is not only got and retained exclusively by ballot boxes. So there is a tendency of blocking such things suspected to be demonstrations because no one is sure what the ramifications might be. That's a comment from Elder John Erestu there. Benon Fred Twinamasiko, in regard to corruption, we are at the point of no return. Everyone is making a last-minute loot. Thank you for the show. That's his comment there. Then another comment from Anthony. Most Kenyan youth are lazy and jobless. Most of them join the protest without thinking how the country can grow. It's unfortunate that the youth are eating leaves and gossiping from morning tonight, and that is a shame. Then there's somebody actually who disagrees with him, who actually says, and the comment was directly in reference to Honorable Chinobe. The person says, kindly remind Honorable Chinobe that Museveni said when IGG wanted to use lifestyle audit to check on corrupt officials, even Madame Mulyagonja once said that all thieves have their have their footsteps in the State House. Lastly, it's Mr. Museveni who has recycled corrupt officials into his government, like those of Global Fund, CHOGAM, etc. There's a comment I'm looking for here, which was directly to you, Honorable Chinove, which was actually suggesting that the young people in Nairobi that you think are not informed could probably even be university graduates who are closely following what has been happening in their country.
And
very quickly, your closing remarks as we come to the
That's a
end.
good point. I also wanted to push Major Chinove on that. Maybe he's too old to understand young people.
All right, gentlemen, unfortunately, we have run out of time. We have to bring this discussion to an end. Thank you very much, dear.